Greetings, everybody. So today we will be presenting the product of a collaboration between the Faculty of Education and the Department of Mathematics from the University of Montreal. So we hope that by the end of this talk, that through our project that we will share with you in a few minutes, you will have new ideas to motivate but also empower students through the learning of differential equation. Before diving into the learning activities about epidemics, I would like to share with you the context that encouraged us to work on this project. We can observe that the social, environmental, and health challenges that the society are currently facing are gaining in complexity. At the same time, we might observe in our classes that many students are interested in these areas. However, they might not always see how mathematics can contribute to help them tackle the challenges that they will face. And it's not a secret that the perception that students have about mathematics are not always positive. In order to interest them to mathematics, it is important to teach mathematics with realistic situations and contexts that interest them. And that's where the importance of teaching how to model enters. Many tools are available to address the application of calculus, and my colleagues will present a few of them later. But there is, however, a limited set of learning resources that use these tools in order to help us teach mathematics with authentic context while respecting the complexity and by welcoming the insight given by the other disciplines' knowledge. Given all of that, we want to encourage the teaching of mathematics to prepare students to tackle the complexity of all these challenges and have them see the contribution of mathematics for the purpose. By democratizing access to modeling and simulation, we wanted to expand capacities to predict, explain, and exercise critical judgment in order to contribute to the social debate. In our project named Viamath, we developed ready-to-use activities that encourage the learning of modeling. As you can see in the next slide, we have developed activities around health, but also environmental issues. In these activities, we also included project statements for capstone and end of the semester projects to encourage students to get creative. Beyond the mathematics and modeling, our aims include the desire to use technology to tackle the complexity, value critical judgment, and mathematical reasoning, because we all know that mathematics are more than just numbers.
So if we describe the didactical principles that kind of led us in designing these activities, we very much value exploration and search of explanation before getting into formalizing. We want also to make use of multiple representation in developing models and interpreting the results. And we also want to have some progression in the modeling complexity by starting with very simple models and progressively have them refined. And as much as possible, because modeling and simulation does rely on mathematics, we want to open black boxes as much as possible, especially when we use simulators that may help us along the way. To illustrate that, we will start with our first activity, which is really the simplest case of them all, the classical SIR model for modeling epidemics. Now, we all know it doesn't capture the complexity of a pandemic that we've all became expert on. But as a starting block, this is something that is valuable to introduce these ideas of modeling. So we have on the left-hand side, the classical differential equations, and on the right-hand side, something that could be called a compartmental model, but it also is very much used in the approach to modeling that is system dynamics, where that representation not only is a description of the situation, but also a way to input the specified model in a software such as that have existed since that have been there for at least 40 years, starting with Stella and Vensim, and the one we currently use is InsightMaker. So in InsightMaker, such a model becomes a way to input. You use these icons to describe the stocks for your model with initial values that you can specify. You can also put sliders in to dynamically change those values. And you specify the inflows and the outflow of this compartment to becoming the inflow of that compartment with your equations that refer to the variables you have specified in there. Before you do a simulation of that model, now we can simulate such a model, but you have to make sure that the settings correspond to what you want. So here we have a simulation of 30 days, and we're going to use a time step of 0.01 and Euler's method. You could also get into finer schemes with fourth order Runge-Kutta method. And so we can now start simulate this thing, and we'll get the classical curve that we all have learned to know and love. We can also ask the system to provide a table of values. We can also ask for phase portraits between two variables. That's also a possibility provided by InsightMaker, among many others that you will unveil as we go along. So that's a very simple model first. And as I say, so those are two representations. And actually, we don't start with the differential equations. We'd rather have students play with the model the way it is defined, because it's much more easy to understand, and especially with a context as epidemics that we've learned to understand better in the preceding years. And so we start here, and then we move here, and I will show you rapidly what it looks like in the activity. So they are invited to go to the model, do few experiments, even fill some table of values, and answer to questions. When is it doubling? When is the number of infected people doubling? And other question of analysis. And eventually they get to the differential equations, and with even an introduction, a definition of what is a differential equation. You may have noticed that this is all in French. So far we haven't gone into translation, but with the available tools today, I don't see it as being an obstacle. I talked about opening black boxes. An important one to open is the one that is responsible for the simulation. Once students understand now that these are the differential equations, now we discretize them, and we isolate the value of S for the next time value. And we do that for the three specific differential equations, which are now reduced to simple arithmetic expressions on the three variables involved. And we also offer a view that this could actually be done with a spreadsheet very easily, and as the variables intertwine in their respective construction. And we even provide a spreadsheet file that will convince them of the feasibility of that. So now the simulation is no longer a black box. You can just make it a bit larger. So you can zoom on a value here, see the equation that is responsible for producing it, and you see those two values have been used in addition to those parameters at first. This is the first model. So of course, we want those models to be refined, because of course, it does not capture the complexity that Shophika mentioned at first. So first, modification or refinement that we propose is to consider force of infection as being also dependent on the population number. That allows us to isolate the R0 parameter that we have heard a lot of epidemiologists that have described the evolution of a pandemic. We also introduce vaccination in a very crude format first, but we have students exercise their critical thinking. Could we make it more realistic? Do we really get immunity on day of vaccination? Could we introduce a delay in immunity acquisition, and even a loss of immunity that would make us the resistant go back to being the susceptible? Another variation that has been done, another refinement, what has been suggested by one of the students that worked on the project, who really wanted to distinguish between the infectious without symptoms and those with symptoms, with the assumption that symptoms would come at some point. So for doing that, he decided to go with an agent-based model, which is also provided or afforded by the Insight Maker software. So those are no longer compartments with flows between them, but rather states of a person through which a person might go. And the transition from one state to the other is governed by stochastic equations that provide some additional realism to the simulation. So if you simulate something like that, you will get, so those with symptoms are the blue ones, people move away from them, but the yellow ones keep on mingling with the rest of the people, and eventually the infection or not, may reach everyone or not, is a case where it hasn't done it. But we would do another simulation and we would see that it could, because of the stochastic nature of it. So we sort of see familiar curves here, but they are much less smooth than the ones we saw with differential equations. But there are interesting connections to make between those two models. But this is really thought of as a potential project for a capstone at the end of a program, and it's not really considered as one of the activities that we would like to see implemented in a traditional differential equation course. It's something done by students more advanced in programming, for instance. We've tested those activities, not just the epidemics, but alcohol absorption and other around CO2 and for environmental context. And what the math instructors that tested these activities really liked were the proposed contexts. They perceived it as being authentic and motivating for the students. The transferability of the model structures from alcohol to insulin, for instance. The alternance between exploration of the model and its analysis with our sneaky way of introducing math theory just when we need it. So the contexts are no longer applications of math that has been taught, but a context where the math content emerges as we go along. The visual approach provided by modeling with compartments, the flexibility, power, and ease of use of a tool like Insight Maker. You can clone model, you can make it your own, modify it, and be creative with that. And the use of real data. Well, that was not clearly visible in the example I have shown you. So we saw that there was a potential for further refinements and even an interest from the teachers of us going in that direction, particularly with epidemics, where students have become more also aware of all the subtleties of such problematic. So fortunately, in our acquaintances, we had Jacques and Geneviève from the Department of Mathematics. Geneviève is an undergraduate student who did a summer project with Jacques, and she will tell you about that project that inspired us for a third activity on epidemics.
All right, so last summer, we actually worked on developing a model that incorporates the perception of the population regarding the pandemic. So we decided to separate the population in half. So when the first group in the population would actually follow sanitary measures that were implemented, and the other group, so the group 2, would not follow these measures. And each population would have the possibility to actually change their behavior once they recover. So for example, one person that would that used to follow measures and that would get COVID could afterwards start to, well, actually stop following these measures. So we have these movements between the groups. And the model was built using differential equations. So we have all of them here. And it was solved numerically. So this is, it shows how the movements go in our model. So we have the same compartments in each group, and they just, it's built on an SIR model, but a bit more complex. And with this model, we were able to get some results. So here we have the impact of a key parameter, which is described here. So it's the proportion of the first population, so the people that used to follow sanitary measures, that cease to adhere to these measures once they recover from COVID. And we see that as it increases, we have way more daily cases than in the case where people keep following these measures, which is what we expected.
So we used these ideas from Geneviève, and we tried to make an insight maker model out of that. So you see here, you recognize those two populations, the first one and the second one here. And with the movement between the two, so those that recover in population 2 may elect now to go to adhering to the social measures, whereas those in the group 1 also may, out of fatigue, decide to join those from group 2 because the pandemic keeps on dragging. So this is the 6th version of the model, and we've all made clones out of these models, modify them, discuss our assumptions, and this is something that it's a working version of it. So when we simulate it, one thing I could add also is that the revision also of these positions is influenced by the degree of alert, and that is triggered by the number of people in the hospital, which is the way actually politicians reacted as well. The idea was not to saturate the hospitals with the patients from COVID. So we have sanitary measures here, which are described, which are there to capture the way the sanitary measures have changed and have limited contacts within the population. So those are kind of data that we adjusted to reflect the reality. And so if we simulate and we have the same with vaccine protection and virulence to kind of reflect the variants also that we saw. So we have, this is for the first population, this is for the group 2. This is, they are, in our model here, the group 2 is really moving towards population 1 here. With the parameters that we have managed to set here and show in this scenario, where you have a 15% that do not adhere at first and 50% of those who recover from that group may change their position. This is what we are getting. And we have captured the hospitalization, at least in the first part. And now the variants, we are not doing such a good job at this point. We may try to refine the way we take into account the variants. But for the death itself, we've managed to follow it quite closely, except for the beginning where we had a very large amount of casualties among senior peoples in senior homes in Quebec, particularly. What is interesting to see also is how people change from one group to another. And if I were to just link those results to those sliders, I could move here, or we can change a scenario, which is a combination of all those parameters. And here, we're just move the revision of position to 0. So people from group 2 stick to their position, and only people from group 1 change position. If we look now at the death, the resulting on the death, whereas the data showed the 18,000 people being dying from COVID here, we would have doubled that with just changing this parameter if people would not change position from group 2. So that's a very quick review of what we did. So what we have learned from the exercise, or got confirmed, is that stocks and flow provide a useful representation to get an overall view of a model if we contrast it to the nice and fancy set of equations that Geneviève showed at the beginning. And our colleagues from the math department were pleasantly surprised with how easy it was to communicate ideas there and to discuss and review assumptions together. Cloning of models enables efficient parallel work within a team. And designing a working model for us was perceived as a really useful step before envisioning a modeling learning activity. That may be different when we think in terms of a modeling project, but if you really want a modeling activity where students will get some specific learning elements, we need to have something that is works at first, and where we can remove some elements, have students rebuild some of those, and even consider refinement to the models, but we need to have something that is quite stable at first. So now the questions for discussion, that there was kind of a debate, or how much should data drive model definition, especially from our students who are not too comfortable having those table of values kind of dictate the sanitary measures, and would have preferred some mathematical function that could, but we wanted to refer the arbitrariness of some elements, or elements which are not considered in the model that may lead to political decisions. So we had to, in some way, make be contented with the idea of using as input some sort of data. Are we still doing math? And what about the students when we work into such an environment? So I'll pass on to Jacques from the math department to get his seal of approval on that one.
So the question arises when one is involved in the serious application, where is the mathematics? Has the mathematics been diluted or even eliminated from the activities? And I think that's not the case at all. And in this case, the context in which Insight Maker is used to intertwine the model development and the numerical simulation is very much in line with the approach of dynamical systems and modeling to learn differential equations. And with the model building process intertwined with the introduction of mathematical tools, it's easy to see that the concepts that one traditionally encounters in a differential equations class do occur here. So the order of equations, systems, arbitrary order, in fact, depending on the complexity of the modeling. And the way Insight Maker is built, it also allows for the introduction of piecewise functions defined piecewise, even piecewise constant. And this interaction between numerics and graphics and even numerical in a Farman table, as was presented, gives quite a complete perspective on the way differential equations are built, and the notion of dynamics, I think, is paramount in these activities. And the way the numerical simulations are actually implemented can also be seen at different levels of details between the numerics and the discrete version. So as was mentioned, Eulers and Runge-Kutta are available, and there's flexibility in the amount of opening of the black box that's possible. And so how much details are under the hood is quite over a significant range. So the classical concepts like linearity, stability, oscillations can easily be introduced. And the notion of complexity, which is complex by itself, as described by Hunt in his 2007 ICTMA paper, sort of presents mathematics in the context of decision-making. And I think the recent pandemic has been a illustration of the way mathematics can be used in real life and how to deal with changes and how can it be introduced in the context of applications. So the answer to the question is the mathematics content evacuated is an emphatic no. There is mathematics in these activities.
And I would just add rapidly that also it all depends what we mean by mathematics. We can see it as a body of concepts, but we can also see it as a mathematical practice. And if we follow the idea of habits of mind that are involved in doing mathematics, both pure and applied, I think we are pretty much covering all of these aspects suggested by Poco in his 1996 paper. And those are all useful skills to develop if one is to think about using mathematics for the real world. And I will just leave you with those two addresses for websites if you want to know more about our activities. So far, our site is in French, but if you would like to have contribute in the translation, you're more than welcome. And also for Insight Maker, where you'll find tutorials both for agent-based modeling. I saw in the chat that there was interested in that as well, and for compartment modeling. And the example they use for those tutorials is also based on epidemics, so you'd be in a good place to start.
Presentation was wonderful. I think, yeah, it was thorough enough. Nobody has any questions. So thank you so much. You all are welcome to exit this room and head to whatever session you would like to go to next.
Thank you, Anna.